You hear the horns and you know what that means. It's breaking news. Clemson has sued the ACC, the second member institution to sue the conference in the past 3 months. Pete Nakos from On3 joins me. Pete, we've been reading through this complaint, and basically it is Clemson saying, we would like some clarity from you, state court in South Carolina. This lawsuit was filed in Pickens County, South Carolina. So if you are keeping score, the ACC has sued Florida State in North Carolina. Florida State has sued the ACC in Florida. And now Clemson has sued the ACC in South Carolina. So we have 3 venues here. And Clemson is saying we need some clarity on this grant of rights, on these withdrawal penalties. And basically, Pete, there's a lot of, what if Clemson wasn't a member of the ACC? Would the grant of rights still hold?
I don't think they would hold, Andy. But man, just reading through this lawsuit in the first 30 minutes since it dropped, maybe 40 minutes, full of bangers. I mean, Clemson just kind of kicks it off right away, right? The ACC grant of rights hinders Clemson's ability to meaningfully explore its options regarding conference membership. Clemson wants out, and this is official. Yeah,
they definitely want out. And so it's amazing how many times they come to this. And obviously in a complaint, you're trying to cover all your bases. But it says the media rights to games played while Clemson is a member of the ACC are the only rights necessary for the ACC to perform the conference's obligations under the ACC's media rights to the ESPN. The media rights to games played at a time when Clemson is not a member of the ACC were never part of any grant of rights. And our assumption all along, and that's from talking to people at the conference, and this is, going back years, is that this was this ironclad thing that lasted till 2036. And we've seen Florida State challenge it. And now we've seen Clemson challenge it. In Florida State's challenge of it, and I believe this is also in Clemson's challenge, Pete, but this is redacted in Clemson's challenge because it's part of the ESPN ACC contract, which the Clemson said, just redact this and then make the ACC prove why it should be redacted. Otherwise, we're going to open it up. But Florida State sort of let the cat out of the bag. ESPN has an option that it can pick up as of February 2025 for 2027 through 2036. So this is all coming down the pipe really fast.
Yes.
And it sure seems like Clemson, like Florida State, is ready to explore other conference membership.
So Clemson is definitely willing to and happy to explore new conference membership. This is something that Clemson has been working on for months, right, Andy? I mean, you and I both heard this. This is not some major shocker. And the other thing that jumps out too, right, is the ACC. I wrote it in my story, right? They just don't want to pay the exit fee, and they're not exactly challenging the current grant of rights in the sense of they just want to be able to move on. And I guess what I'm trying to get to, what I mean, is and correct me if I'm wrong here, right? But Clemson just wants to get out of the grant of rights. They're not challenging the actual grant of rights. They're just trying to move on. And I know I know that's a word.
Yeah, if you ask Jim Phillips, he would tell you that no, the ACC owns the rights after you leave.
Right, that's what I'm trying to say. Yes.
Clemson's saying that's not true. But what Clemson is also saying, and this is something Florida State has said, is the $140 million withdrawal fee is an exorbitant penalty that isn't enforceable. And that's what all of these entities are trying to get clarity from the court system before they make a move. And even the ACC's lawsuits against Florida State essentially asks for clarity. It asks for the court to affirm the grant of rights and say, hey, this is legal and binding. You guys are stuck. So we have now 3 venues. We have 2 schools that have sued. We know there are 2 others who want out and could potentially do the same thing, North Carolina and Miami. Now, North Carolina has been pretty diplomatic about all of this. Bubba Cunningham just last week was in an interview. He's the athletic director of North Carolina, was saying, hey, we can protect ourselves and look ahead, but we also don't have to be as aggressive. But I do wonder now that Clemson has joined the fray, because before it felt like everybody was looking at Florida State going, yeah, but that's a little, I don't know. You guys are a little aggressive for our taste. Maybe we do this a little bit differently. But now that Clemson's joined the fray, I feel like this could open the floodgates.
Right. And the other thing that's in this lawsuit that we haven't talked about that indicates how Clemson feels and maybe other schools feel is Clemson writes in this lawsuit that they weren't asked to vote on the ACC filing the lawsuit against Florida State, and they didn't sign off on it. That's the clearest as day as Clemson can be, that, hey, we're on Team Florida State now. We want Florida State to win out in their lawsuit. We want to win our lawsuit. And it probably also signals to North Carolina probably didn't sign off on this lawsuit. So that really jumps out. And obviously, getting back to the point I was trying to make is Clemson wants the court to rule that it doesn't have any fiduciary duties to the ACC.
Correct. Yes. That they're not in a joint venture together, that those schools are not in a joint venture. And that was interesting. I don't believe that's in Florida State's lawsuit. That's a little bit different tack. So we'll see. And interestingly enough, like these different schools attacking the ACC in different ways, probably bad for the ACC. CU Tigers Win in the chat says, what is the conference war chest for lawsuits before they have to ask the teams in the conference for more money to fight the lawsuits? They could be fighting 4 to 6 at once. That's true. Because if North Carolina and Miami were to join, or if, say, Virginia decided to join, I don't know that they would, but that would be pretty tough. And to fight on all these different fronts in all these different states, because you have to hire attorneys who are experts in that state's law.
Yep.
And it could get pretty expensive. Now, I've said for a long time, this is going to come to a number at some point.
Yes.
This is never going to trial. This will get settled. Florida State and Clemson or whoever else and the ACC will come up with a number.
Yep.
The question is, what's the number? What is it going to cost?
You've written about it before, right? I mean, the ACC clearly is very open to negotiations. They alluded to it in a previous filing. I believe that one was in the.
I don't know if they're open to negotiation. That was in their lawsuit against, or the Florida State lawsuit against the ACC in Florida. And basically what the ACC was saying is it's a commercial possibility that you could just buy your way out. But from what people have told me, that is the lawyers just basically countering all of Florida State's arguments, not necessarily the ACC saying we're open for business, let's negotiate. I do think they're going to have to come to that at some point, though. Yeah,
no, I definitely think it has to happen. You've written about this. I've kind of talked to some people about it. It seems like the number, right, is what, 275, give or take, with the highest being around 500 million, I believe.
572 million is what Florida State put in their lawsuit as what they feel is kind of the max, where you add the total of the TV rights through 2036 plus the withdrawal fee. 572 is the number they come up with.
Yeah.
I think if you told them you could get out for 150 million today, they would write the check tonight. So realistically, the number you come to is somewhere in between there. And the thing about this, Pete, that I think is interesting, people always want, we got a lot of questions when the ACC added Stanford and Cal and SMU.
Yeah.
And my thinking was always, this is backfilling to make sure you're still taking care of your TV agreements if you lost members. And that way you're already set up to have 15 members, including Notre Dame, which is a non-football member.
Yeah.
Even if you were to lose, let's say you lost Florida State, Clemson, North Carolina, then you'd still have the right number of members. Your TV contract could still be in effect. But this is interesting because you wonder how quickly anybody else jumps in, because it took a few months for Clemson to get here. They're kind of operating under the radar.
Yeah.
What do you think it was that generated this now?
They have obviously been working on this for months. I don't think it was exactly a, hey, like, this happened, so now we need to file the lawsuit. I think they did their due diligence and they got to the point where they felt very comfortable moving forward with this. I do think, though, and this is overarchingly, right? Like the NCAA is as powerless as ever, right? With these preliminary injunctions with the transfer portal and NIL. I think the college sports landscape lends itself to Clemson and Florida State winning these lawsuits. And I think the pressure is bigger than ever against the ACC, where the ACC will probably want to settle at some point rather than see how this plays out in the court. Because in my opinion, and in some attorneys I've talked to, I think that there's an opinion that Florida State and Clemson probably could win in the court. And that I don't think that is something the ACC wants to see play out.
They can't. That's the thing that that's why I've been so certain when I've said this. As long as there's a non-zero chance of the ACC losing any of these lawsuits, they can't go to court. Yep. They can't take it to trial. They would have to settle it, because the option if you lose, or the consequences if you lose, are all of this falls apart and you get nothing. Now, if you settled with Florida State and Clemson and let's say North Carolina, and let's say you settled for $250 or $300 million each, which sounds like a lot of money, but in the grand scheme, it's actually basically paying a mortgage. If you wind up if they wind up in the Big Ten or the SEC, they kind of break even over the next 10 years.
Right.
It's at least you'd have a pile of cash sitting there to deal with whatever happens next.
Yeah.
That feels like the best alternative at this point.
I guess the question I pose to you now, Andy, though, is let's say that does play out, right? And let's say, I don't know, Virginia and North Carolina join, and now you're 4 schools down. At what point does the ACC need to really sit down and consider what happens next, right? Because you lose those 4 schools and the TV product is devalued and the conference is devalued. And you have to think at some point, does Jim Phillips turn to the Big Ten or the SEC and ask, will you absorb us? And I know that sounds so earth-shaking, and I know some people would say
he should have been asking that 2 years ago.
Well, right. I mean, the alliance did what it did, but I guess the question is, do you think that day is coming sooner than a lot of people think?
Well, I think the answer to that would be no. I think the answer to that would be, we'll take what we want and you guys deal with whatever happens next. And so here's what I'm thinking. One significant thing that happened on Tuesday, or I think it happened late Monday. Remember, we knew that the conferences were set to agree on the new college football playoff contract that went through 2032. And so we saw Ross Dellinger report, I think Tuesday morning, that memorandum of understanding has been signed and it's been executed. Well, what does that do? What does that particular thing do that's significant? What it does is it codifies the ACC as a second-class citizen, and the Big 12 for that matter.
Yeah.
So the revenue split, the way the new college football playoff revenue split will work starting in 2026, is the Big 10 and the SEC each get, I believe, 29% of all the money.
Roughly $22 million per school, I believe.
$22 million per school. The ACC gets 21%, which is $13 million per school. So you've just added $8 million to a revenue gap, $8 million a year per school to a revenue gap that was already going to be $30 to $50 million a year, depending on whether it's the SEC or the Big Ten we're talking about.
Yeah.
If you're Florida State and you're Clemson and you're North Carolina and you could potentially go to one of these things if you were available, you have to do something at that point.
Yeah.
They've put it in writing now.
Yeah. I mean, you read the lawsuit today, right? And at one point, the Clemson attorneys write in the complaint, it's Clemson's athletic department responsibility, I'm paraphrasing here, that they need to go seek new membership in another conference because of the revenue gap. And it's bigger than ever. It's where college sports is right now. It doesn't seem to be slowing down, especially with this new ESPN deal. And I know that there's been plenty of reports out ESPN isn't going to give more money if they go to 14 or 16.
Right.
But at the same time, right, this is the landscape they're in, and the money isn't going to change, which also means that the SEC and the Big Ten are the richest of the rich.
Right. And that's not changing. And that's only going to get bigger and worse. And so if you're Florida State, if you're Clemson, and here's the thing, a lot of people keep asking this, and it's a legitimate question. Let's say they get out. Is somebody going to take them? And I would argue that if I'm the Big Ten, if I'm Fox, which is really in charge of the Big Ten in terms of television and everything.
Yeah.
I look at the SEC schedules, what they came out with the 16-team version once they added Oklahoma and Texas. And I look at that and I go, you know what? Their product is still a lot better than ours. We've got to find a way to improve our product. If you could sprinkle Florida State and Clemson across all of the Big Ten schedules, suddenly it's a lot better product. Now, if you're the SEC, you go, wait a second. That's our geographic territory. That's our footprint. Yeah. Do we want to let them into our footprint, or do we choke them out and improve our product?
Yeah, I mean, and now you have a realignment battle on your hands, right? You just made the case. The Big Ten and the SEC both have great reasons to add, and I know, right? South Carolina loves to be the only SEC school in the state, but at the same time, if you're Greg Sankey, you got to bring your presidents together and say, like, hey, we can only add value to our product with adding in Clemson or a Florida State. So yeah, it's so we currently have a situation where the SEC and the Big Ten are working together, but if certain events play out, they could be pitted right against each other. Yeah,
it is amazing, and that's college athletics in 2024 in a nutshell. So to review. The ACC sued Florida State and North Carolina first because they knew that Florida State was going to sue the ACC in Florida, which happened the next day. That was in December. On Tuesday, Clemson sues the ACC in South Carolina. God only knows what Wednesday will bring. Pete Nakos, thank you so much.
Thank you.